Welcome to Dark Seduction Stories, where dangerous love, powerful obsessions, and romance that changes everything. Drop your location in the comments, and let's dive into tonight's tale. The first time Margot saw Harrow House, she thought it looked like something dying slowly. The estate sprawled across the hilltop like a sleeping beast, its Georgian facade crumbling at the edges, ivy strangling the eastern wing. Spanish moss dripped from the live oaks lining the drive, creating a tunnel of green shadow that seemed to swallow her rental car whole. It was late August in Killeen, Georgia, and the heat sat on everything, like a hand pressed over a mouth. She had driven 12 hours straight from Philadelphia, fueled by gas station coffee and the kind of restless energy that comes from running towards something instead of away. For once, the commission had come through her former professor, Dr. Rothstein, who knew she needed work badly enough not to ask too many questions. Restore a private collection of 18th and 19th century paintings, 6 months of work, housing provided, enough money to finally pay off the debts Marcus had left her with when he'd wrapped his car around a telephone pole 2 years ago, drunk and high, and still managing to destroy her life from beyond the grave. Margot parked in the circular drive and stepped out into air so thick it felt like breathing through cloth. The house loomed above her, 3 stories of red brick turned burgundy with age, white columns stained with water damage and time. Several windows on the upper floor were boarded over. Others were dark and watching. She was pulling her suitcase from the trunk when she heard footsteps on the gravel behind her. "You must be Miss Bellamy." The voice was smooth, cultured, with just enough southern warmth to take the edge off formality. Margot turned and felt something in her chest stumble. The man approaching was tall, lean in the way of someone who forgot to eat when focused on other things. He wore dark jeans and a white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and scattered with old scars. But it was his face that caught her. Sharp cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile, and eyes the color of bourbon in dim light. Dark circles beneath them suggested he slept as poorly as she did. His black hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar, shot through with premature silver at the temples. He looked like he might be 35 or 50 or ageless. "James Harrow," he said, extending a hand. "Welcome to my family's monument to excess and poor judgment." His hand was warm and calloused when she shook it, his grip firm but brief. She caught a scent of old books and something darker, like earth after rain. "Margot," she said, "thank you for the opportunity. Dr. Rothstein spoke highly of your collection. Did he tell you I've been trying to hire a restorer for 3 years?" James picked up her suitcase before she could protest. Most take one look at Killeen and decide they'd rather work elsewhere. Small towns make people nervous, especially small southern towns with more history than sense. He started toward the house and she fell into step beside him, acutely aware of how his presence seemed to command the space around him. She'd learned to read men carefully after Marcus, learned to spot the warning signs, the small cruelties, the need for control. But James Harrow felt different. There was something almost tired about him, a bone-deep weariness that called to something in her own exhausted soul. "I grew up in a small town," Margot said. "I know how they work. Everyone knows everything, or thinks they do. Then you understand why I left for 10 years. He climbed the front steps, which creaked under their weight. "Only came back when my father died last year, and someone had to deal with all this." He gestured vaguely at the house. "Turns out you can't just walk away from 300 years of family history, no matter how much you'd like to." The front door was massive oak, carved with intricate patterns that had softened with age. James pushed it open, and the hinges screamed. Inside, the air was cooler but heavier, saturated with the smell of old wood and dust, and something indefinable, something that made the hair on Margot's arms stand up. The entrance hall was grand in the way of old southern homes, all soaring ceilings and dark wood paneling. A chandelier dripping with crystals hung from a chain that looked questionable at best. The floor was black and white marble in a checkerboard pattern, cracked in places, missing tiles in others. But what caught Margot's attention was the paintings. They lined every wall, ascending the curved staircase, disappearing into shadows above. Portraits mostly, faces from different eras staring down with expressions that ranged from imperious to melancholy, but the condition of them made her heart sink. Canvases were darkened with centuries of grime, varnish yellowed and cracking. Several had visible tears. Others showed signs of water damage, the paint lifting away from the canvas in scales, moving toward the nearest portrait. It showed a woman in an emerald dress, circa 1840s, based on the style. Her dark hair pulled back severely from a face that might have been beautiful, if not for the coldness in her painted eyes. The plaque beneath read, Catherine Harrow, 1822-1867. "I know," James said quietly behind her. "It's worse than the photos I sent Dr. Rothstein. The East Wing has a leak we can't seem to locate. It's affecting everything." Margot stepped closer, her trained eye cataloguing the damage. But as she studied Catherine Harrow's face, something else caught her attention. There, barely visible beneath the layers of darkened varnish, something in the background, a shadow that seemed wrong, too deliberate. She tilted her head trying to make it out. "There are 47 paintings total," James said, drawing her attention back. "Most are family portraits, but there are some landscapes, a few religious pieces, all collected by various Harrows over the years. Some are quite valuable, according to the appraiser. Others are just, well, sentimental. They're all worth saving," Margot said firmly. "Even the damaged ones, especially the damaged ones." Something shifted in James's expression, a softening around his eyes that made him look younger. "That's what I was hoping you'd say. Come on, I'll show you your studio and quarters. Then maybe you'd like dinner. There's a place in town that does passable shrimp and grits." He led her up the grand staircase, past more portraits with their watching eyes, down a corridor lined with closed doors. The house seemed to stretch on forever, room after room, wing after wing. Margot found herself wondering how anyone could live here alone without going mad. "This will be yours," James said, opening a door to reveal a surprisingly spacious bedroom. The furniture was antique, but well-maintained. A 4-poster bed with fresh white linens, a writing desk by the window, an overstuffed armchair that looked perfect for reading. The window overlooked the back gardens, which were overgrown but still showed hints of their former grandeur. "It's lovely," Margot said, and meant it. "Thank you. Your studio is just down the hall." He set her suitcase down by the bed. "I've set up what I hope is adequate lighting and ventilation. If you need anything else, just let me know. I want you to have everything you need to work." There was something in the way he said it, an intensity that made her look at him more closely. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between hope and desperation. "I should unpack," she heard herself say. "Maybe take a rain check on dinner. It's been a long drive." The disappointment that flashed across his face was so quick she almost missed it. "Of course," he said smoothly. "I'll have Mrs. Chen bring you up a tray. She's the housekeeper, comes in 3 times a week. You'll like her. She's the only person in Killian who doesn't gossip." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Margot, I'm glad you're here. I know that probably sounds strange. We've just met, but this place, it needs, I don't know, life, maybe. It's been nothing but death and decay for so long." Then he was gone, pulling the door closed behind him with a soft click. And Margot was left standing in the middle of the room, her heart beating faster than it should, wondering what exactly she'd gotten herself into. She unpacked slowly, hanging her few nice clothes in the massive wardrobe, stacking her art restoration books on the desk. The room felt too big, too quiet, the kind of quiet that made you aware of your own breathing. She kept expecting to hear something, footsteps or voices or the settling of old wood. But there was nothing, just silence, pressing in from all sides. True to James's word, an elderly woman with kind eyes and silver hair brought up a tray an hour later. Mrs. Chen, who introduced herself in a voice that suggested she'd been raised somewhere far from Georgia, set down chicken soup and fresh bread and sweet tea in a mason jar. "You eat," she said firmly. "You're too thin. Mr. James said you drove all day." "Thank you," Margot said, surprised by how hungry she suddenly was. "It's very kind of you." Mrs. Chen studied her with sharp black eyes that seemed to see too much. "You be careful in this house," she said quietly. "Old places, they hold on to things. Not always good things." Before Margot could ask what she meant, the housekeeper was gone, her footsteps fading down the hallway. Margot ate at the desk, looking out at the darkening gardens. The sun was setting in violent shades of orange and purple, painting the Spanish moss with fire. In that light, the gardens looked almost beautiful, hiding their wildness beneath gold. She was finishing the last of the tea when she saw movement below. James, walking through the overgrown paths between what had once been formal flower beds. Even from this distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he moved like a man carrying something heavy. He stopped by a stone bench, sat down, dropped his head into his hands. It was such a private moment of despair that Margot felt like a voyeur for watching. But she couldn't look away. There was something about his loneliness that echoed her own, something that made her chest ache with recognition. After Marcus died, after the police finished investigating and the lawyers finished dividing his debts, and the therapist gave up trying to make her talk about it, Margot had felt like she was drowning in silence. Everyone wanted her to move on, to heal, to somehow become whole again. But she'd felt like a painting damaged beyond repair, the canvas torn too deeply to ever truly restore. Looking at James Harrow sitting alone in his family's dying garden, she wondered if he felt the same way. That night, she dreamed of portraits with watching eyes, of shadows that moved in backgrounds where nothing should move, of a woman in an emerald dress standing at the foot of her bed, smiling with too many teeth. She woke with her heart hammering, sheets twisted around her legs, the room still dark but somehow watching. It took her a moment to remember where she was. Harrow House. Killian. Georgia. 6 months of restoration work. Just a dream, she told herself. Just nerves and exhaustion and too much imagination. But when she finally fell back asleep, the woman in the emerald dress was still there, still smiling, still watching. Morning came with birdsong and light streaming through the curtains Margot had forgotten to close. She woke disoriented, the dream of the woman in emerald already fading to fragments. When she checked her phone, it was nearly 9, later than she'd slept in months. There was something about Harrow House that pulled you under, made you sleep deeper than you should. She showered in the adjoining bathroom, which had been updated sometime in the last decade with modern fixtures that looked strange against the vintage tile. The water pressure was excellent and gloriously hot, washing away the last clinging remnants of highway grime and unease. Downstairs, she found the kitchen by following the smell of coffee. It was a massive room at the back of the house, all exposed brick and copper pots hanging from ceiling racks. James stood at the stove, scrambling eggs in a cast iron skillet, still in pajama pants and a faded college t-shirt that read Yale Law in cracked letters. His feet were bare. His hair was uncombed. He looked younger like this, more human, less like a portrait himself. "I heard you moving around," he said without turning. "Hope you're hungry. I tend to cook too much when I'm nervous." Nervous? Margot poured herself coffee from the French press on the counter, doctoring it with cream from a small ceramic pitcher. First day of having someone else in the house. He plated the eggs, added toast and bacon, set everything on the worn farm table that dominated the center of the room. "I've gotten used to the solitude, forgotten how to be around people. Fair warning, I'm probably going to be awkward." "I specialize in awkward," Margot said, sitting across from him. "We can be awkward together." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face, and Margot felt something flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. Dangerous, she thought. This man is dangerous, not because he's cruel, but because he's kind. And kindness from a beautiful, damaged man is the most dangerous thing in the world for a woman trying to keep her heart protected. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that felt natural rather than forced. Through the kitchen windows, Margot could see more of the gardens, a stone fountain choked with weeds, paths disappearing into tangles of wisteria and honeysuckle. "Tell me about the paintings," she said finally. "The collection. Where did they all come from?" James pushed eggs around his plate, his expression darkening slightly. The Harrows have been in Killian since 1723, when my ancestor Jonathan Harrow bought 10,000 acres and built the first version of this house. The family made their fortune in, well, various enterprises over the centuries: timber, cotton, textiles. Each generation added to the house, to the collection. The portraits are mostly family, painted by whoever was fashionable at the time. Some are quite good. Others are, well, less so. And you inherited all of it when your father died. I'm the last Harrow. He said it flatly, without emotion. My mother died when I was 12. My older brother Daniel died 10 years ago, right before I left for Europe. So, yes, I inherited everything. The house, the land, the paintings, the debts, the expectations. 300 years of Harrow history, and I'm the one who gets to watch it all crumble into dust. There was something bitter in his voice, something that went deeper than simple grief. Margot wanted to ask more, wanted to understand the shadows behind his eyes. But she'd learned that you couldn't rush these things. Broken people revealed themselves slowly, in layers, like old varnish being carefully cleaned away. "Show me the studio," she said instead. "I'm eager to get started." Relief washed over his face. He stood, gathering their plates. "Let me just clean up and get dressed. Meet me in the front hall in 20 minutes. The studio turned out to be a converted ballroom on the second floor, with tall windows facing north for perfect natural light. James had set up proper restoration tables, adjustable lighting, a ventilation system that looked brand new. Shelves lined one wall, stocked with supplies, solvents, varnishes, brushes of every size. He'd clearly spared no expense. "This is incredible," Margot breathed, running her hand over one of the tables. "James, this is better equipped than some museum restoration labs I've worked in." He leaned against the doorframe, watching her explore with an expression that was almost hungry. "I wanted you to have everything you needed. These paintings, they're all I have left of my family's better moments. Before everything went wrong, I want them preserved properly, want them to outlast all the darkness." "Where should I start?" Margot asked, already mentally cataloguing the work ahead. "I thought maybe with Catherine." He gestured to the portrait that had caught her attention yesterday, now propped on an easel in the center of the room. "She's one of the most damaged, and honestly, I'd like to see her face properly. My father always said she was beautiful, but I've never been able to tell under all that grime." Margot approached the portrait slowly, pulling on cotton gloves from her kit. In the better light of the studio, the damage was even more apparent. The varnish had darkened to amber, obscuring details. There was water damage in the upper right corner, and what looked like a small tear near Catherine's left hand. But it was that shadow in the background that drew Margot's attention again. That deliberate darkness that seemed to suggest a shape. "I'll need to do some tests first," she said, pulling out her examination equipment. "Establish what kind of paint was used, what the varnish is composed of, how stable the canvas is. Then I can start the cleaning process. It'll take several weeks just for this one. Take all the time you need." James moved toward the door. "I'll leave you to it. I have some estate business to deal with anyway. There's a bell pull by the table if you need anything. Mrs. Chen will hear it." "James?" Margot called as he was leaving. He turned back, eyebrows raised. "Thank you for trusting me with this. I know how personal these paintings must be." Something shifted in his expression, softened. "I have a feeling you understand better than most what it means to restore broken things." Then he was gone, and Margot was alone with Catherine Harrow's painted eyes. She worked methodically, the way she'd been trained. First, examining every inch of the canvas under magnification, documenting the damage with photographs and detailed notes. Then, careful chemical tests on tiny areas at the edge, determining the composition of paint and varnish. It was painstaking work, requiring absolute focus, and Margot was grateful for it. When she was working, she didn't have to think about Marcus or debt collectors, or the way James Harrow looked at her like she might be the answer to a question he was afraid to ask. Hours passed. Mrs. Chen brought lunch on a tray, sandwiches and fruit and cold lemonade, which Margot ate with one hand while making notes with the other. The afternoon light shifted, painting the studio in shades of honey and amber. It was nearly 5 when Margot began the first careful test cleaning on a small section in the lower right corner, away from Catherine's face. She'd mixed a gentle solvent, tested it thoroughly, and now she applied it with a cotton swab in tiny controlled circles. The yellowed varnish began to dissolve, revealing paint beneath. Margot worked slowly, removing layer after layer of aged coating, watching colours emerge that had been hidden for decades. The emerald of Catherine's dress became richer, more vibrant. Details in the fabric appeared, tiny seed pearls sewn into the bodice. And then, in the background, that shadow began to take form. Margot's hands stilled. She leaned closer, her heart beginning to beat faster. Under the varnish, under decades of dirt and oxidation, there was something there. Not a shadow at all, but a figure. A person, painted dark, deliberately obscured, almost hidden in the background of Catherine's portrait. Margot could make out the suggestion of a face, eyes that seemed to stare directly out of the canvas, a mouth open as if in a scream or plea. She sat back, her pulse racing. It wasn't uncommon for artists to paint over previous compositions, to reuse canvases or change elements of a painting. But this felt different. This figure had been deliberately darkened, deliberately hidden, not painted over, but obscured with layers of dark pigment that had been applied after the original portrait was finished. Someone had wanted this figure to disappear. Find something interesting. Margot jumped, her hand knocking over a jar of solvent that she caught just before it hit the floor. James stood in the doorway, changed into fresh clothes, his hair damp from a shower. She hadn't heard him approach. "Sorry," he said, moving into the room. "Didn't mean to startle you. I knocked, but you were concentrating." Margot set the jar down carefully, trying to calm her racing heart. "There's something in the background of the portrait. A figure that's been obscured. See?" She gestured to the area she'd been cleaning. James leaned over her shoulder, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something with cedar and smoke. His breath stirred her hair. "I don't see anything," he said after a moment. "Here." Margot guided his gaze, pointing with a gloved finger. "Once I clean more, it should become clearer. But there's definitely someone there. Someone the original artist painted, then someone else covered up." James was quiet for a long moment, studying the canvas. "Why would they do that?" he asked finally. "I don't know. Maybe the figure was a servant or slave, and later the family decided they didn't want them visible in the portrait. It wasn't uncommon in that era, or maybe it was a relative who'd been disgraced. Without more context, it's hard to say. Can you reveal it?" There was something intense in his voice now, almost urgent. "Can you bring them back?" "Yes," Margot said slowly. "As I clean the varnish, the figure will become more visible. That's part of restoration, revealing what's been hidden by time and damage." "Why? Does it matter?" James straightened, running a hand through his hair. "No, I suppose not. I'm just curious. This house is full of secrets, and I've never known most of them. My father wasn't much for sharing family history. Said the past should stay buried. In my experience," Margot said quietly, "buried things have a way of clawing back to the surface whether we want them to or not." His eyes met hers, and in them she saw recognition, the understanding of one haunted person to another. "Speaking from experience?" he asked softly. "Isn't everyone?" The air between them felt charged suddenly, heavy with things unsaid. Margot was acutely aware of how close he was standing, how easy it would be to lean into him, to let herself take comfort in another person's warmth. But she'd learned that lesson already. Marcus had been charming too, damaged too, had needed her too, and look how that had ended. She stepped back, putting professional distance between them. "I should clean up for the day. I don't want to overwork the canvas on the first session." Disappointment flickered across James's face again, but he nodded. "Of course. I was thinking, if you're not too tired, maybe I could show you around Killian, get you oriented. There's not much to see, but there's a good bookstore and a decent coffee shop, and you should probably know where the grocery store is." It was so normal, so domestic, that Margot found herself smiling. That would be nice, actually. Give me 20 minutes to clean my brushes. Take your time. He moved toward the door, then paused. Margot, I'm glad you're here. I know I said that yesterday, but I mean it. It's been a long time since this house felt like anything other than a tomb. After he left, Margot stood alone in the studio, looking at Catherine Harrow's emerging face. The woman's eyes seemed to follow her as she moved, a trick of the light and the artist's skill. And in the background, barely visible but definitely there, that hidden figure watched too, waiting to be revealed. Margot had the strangest feeling that once she brought that figure fully into the light, once she revealed whatever secret had been deliberately obscured, everything would change. She just didn't know yet whether that would be for better or worse. Killian was the kind of small southern town that looked like it had been preserved in amber sometime around 1955. Main Street stretched for exactly 4 blocks, lined with brick storefronts that had seen better days but maintained a certain shabby dignity. There was a courthouse square with a Confederate monument that someone had spray painted over with the words "Never Again" in red letters. The paint had been partially cleaned off, leaving ghost letters that were somehow more unsettling than the original. James drove them in a vintage Land Rover that rattled and smelled like old leather and something floral. "Jasmine," he said when he caught her sniffing. "My mother's perfume. This was her car. I can't seem to get the smell out. Not that I've tried very hard." He parked in front of a place called The Drowsy Poet, which turned out to be a combination bookstore and coffee shop that smelled like old paper and espresso. Inside, every available surface was crammed with books, stacked floor to ceiling, spilling off shelves, creating narrow pathways between literary towers that looked ready to topple at any moment. "James Harrow," a voice called from somewhere deep in the stacks. "As I live and breathe, thought you'd become a hermit up at that house." A woman emerged from behind a particularly precarious stack of hardcovers. She was maybe 60, with wild grey hair held back by a pencil, wearing a purple caftan and at least 7 necklaces that jangled when she moved. Her eyes, bright and sharp as a bird's, fixed on Margot with undisguised curiosity. "Sadie, this is Margot Bellamy," James said. "She's restoring the family portraits." "Margot, Sadie Morrison owns this establishment and knows everything about everyone in Killian, so be warned." "Only the interesting things," Sadie corrected, extending a hand heavy with silver rings. Her grip was firm, her skin cool. "Art restorer, Brave of you taking on Harrow House. That place has eaten more than one person over the years." "Sadie," James said warningly. "What? I'm just stating facts." Sadie's eyes never left Margot's face. "Your brother, God rest him, your mother before that, your father, though I suppose that was more the bourbon than the house. Still, that place has a way of bringing out the darkness in people." "Coffee, Sadie," James said tightly. "2 coffees, please." Sadie shrugged and moved toward the small coffee bar tucked into the back corner. James ran a hand over his face, looking suddenly exhausted. "I'm sorry about that. Sadie means well, but she has no filter." "It's okay," Margot said, though her curiosity was definitely piqued. "How did your brother die, if you don't mind me asking?" James's jaw tightened. "Accident on the property. Fell down the main staircase, broke his neck. He'd been drinking, was always drinking by the end. Father found him in the morning." "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." But the way he said it suggested it wasn't long enough, would never be long enough. Sadie returned with 2 mugs of coffee that smelled like heaven and chicory. "On the house," she said. "Consider it a welcome to Killian gift." She studied Margot for another moment, then added, "You've got ghosts in your eyes, girl. Same as him. Just be careful you don't wake any new ones up at that house." Outside, walking back to the Land Rover with their coffee, Margot said, "She's intense. She's the town witch, or so everyone says." James smiled slightly. "Actually, she's a retired literature professor who moved here 15 years ago and decided to shake things up. But she leans into the witch thing. Says it's good for business." They drove past the grocery store, a post office, a diner called Ruthie's that had a line out the door even at 6 p.m. James pointed out landmarks, his voice falling into a rhythm that suggested he'd given this tour before. though probably not in years. "The Harrows used to own most of the land around here," he said, as they passed what looked like an abandoned textile mill. "That was our factory. Closed in 1987, put half the town out of work. My grandfather tried to keep it open, but cheap imports killed the business. We still own the building, but I can't afford to demolish it or restore it. So it just sits there, rotting, like everything else the Harrows touch." There was such bitterness in his voice that Margot reached out without thinking, touched his arm. He flinched slightly, then looked at her, surprised. "You're not responsible for 300 years of family decisions," she said quietly. "Aren't I?" His eyes were dark, haunted. "I'm the last one, the last Harrow. Everything they did, everything they built, everything they destroyed. It all ends with me, and I don't know if I'm supposed to preserve it or burn it all down." They drove in silence for a while, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of blood, orange and purple. Eventually, they ended up back at Harrow House, that massive pile of brick and history sitting on its hill like a judge looking down on the town below. "Thank you for the tour," Margot said as they climbed out of the Land Rover. "It helps to understand the context." Context. James laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's one word for it. Want dinner? I can throw together some pasta, or we could order from Ruthie's." They ended up in the kitchen again, James cooking while Margot chopped vegetables for a salad, working together in an easy rhythm that felt natural. He opened a bottle of red wine that was probably expensive, poured generous glasses. The pasta was simple but perfect. Garlic and olive oil and fresh tomatoes from what he called the only part of the garden that hasn't completely gone wild. "Tell me about you," James said as they ate at the farm table. "I've been monopolizing the tragic backstory conversation. Your turn." Margot took a long sip of wine, considering how much to reveal. Not much to tell. Grew up in Pennsylvania, small town, working class, family. Got a scholarship to art school. Discovered I was better at fixing paintings than creating them. Worked at a museum in Philadelphia for 5 years. And then, his eyes were intent on her face, reading the things she wasn't saying. "And then I met someone," she said carefully. "Marcus. We got married too fast, divorced too slow. He had problems. Addiction, mainly. I thought I could fix him the way I fix paintings. Carefully, patiently, layer by layer. But people aren't paintings. They don't want to be restored. What happened to him? Car accident. 2 years ago. High and drunk and driving too fast." She met his eyes across the table. "He left me with nothing but debts and the knowledge that I have terrible taste in men." James was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I don't think you have terrible taste. You don't know me well enough to make that judgment." "Maybe not." He refilled both their glasses. "But I know you came here. Took a job in the middle of nowhere, working for a stranger in a house everyone says is cursed. That takes either courage or desperation, and I'm thinking maybe both." "Definitely both," Margot admitted. The wine was making her loose, making her honest. "I needed the work, needed the money, needed to get away from Philadelphia and all the memories there. Needed to prove I could still do the work, that Marcus hadn't broken that part of me too." "Did he? Break you?" "I used to think so." She traced the rim of her wine glass with one finger. "But maybe he just cracked me, and I'm still figuring out if that makes me weaker or stronger. Pottery is more beautiful for being broken and repaired, right? Kintsugi, they call it. The Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold, making the damaged part of the beauty. I like that," James said softly. "The idea that being broken doesn't mean being ruined." Their eyes met across the table, and Margot felt that dangerous pull again, that recognition of shared damage, the temptation to reach for comfort in another broken person. She looked away first, standing abruptly to clear the plates. "Let me help," James said, rising too. They worked side by side at the sink, washing and drying, their shoulders occasionally brushing, creating small electric shocks of contact. When the kitchen was clean, when there were no more excuses to stay, Margot said, "I should get some sleep, early start tomorrow." "Of course." James walked her to the base of the stairs, both of them aware of the portraits watching from the walls. "Margot, thank you for tonight. For listening. I haven't talked to anyone like this in years." "Me neither," she admitted. He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. Margot's breath caught. She should step back, should maintain professional distance, should remember all the reasons this was a bad idea. But she didn't move. "Good night, Margot," James whispered. And then he was stepping back, putting space between them, being the responsible one. She climbed the stairs on shaking legs, feeling his eyes on her back the whole way. That night, she dreamed of hidden figures and secret faces, of paintings that watched and whispered, of James's mouth on hers, of falling and falling with no one to catch her. The next 3 weeks fell into a rhythm. Margot would wake early, find coffee waiting in the kitchen, usually with a note from James who'd gone out on estate business or into town. She'd work in the studio all day, carefully cleaning Catherine's portrait, revealing details that had been hidden for decades. Mrs. Chen brought lunch, sometimes staying to chat about her grandchildren or the weather, never about the house or its history. Evenings, James would appear, and they'd have dinner together, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his decade in Europe, working in various law firms, trying to build a life separate from his family name. She told him about the paintings she'd restored, the satisfaction of bringing beauty back from the edge of destruction. They never talked about the pull between them, the way their hands would brush when passing dishes, the way his eyes would linger on her face, the way her pulse would race when he stood too close. And slowly, painstakingly, Catherine Harrow's portrait revealed its secrets. The hidden figure became clearer with each careful cleaning. A young woman, Margot determined, maybe 20 years old, with dark skin and eyes wide with what looked like terror. She'd been painted standing behind Catherine, one hand reaching out as if in supplication or warning. Her mouth was open, clearly crying out, though what she was saying was lost to time. James breathed when Margot showed him the progress one evening. He stood so close, she could feel the heat of his body. "Who was she?" "I don't know," Margot said. "But someone wanted her erased. See how the darkening was applied? This wasn't age or damage. Someone deliberately painted over her, tried to hide her from view." James was silent, studying the painting with an intensity that made Margot uneasy. "Can you check the other portraits?" he asked finally. "See if there are more hidden figures." "I can do preliminary scans," Margot said slowly. "Use UV light to check for overpaint, but it'll take time and I need to finish Catherine first." "No." His voice was sharp, almost desperate. "Check the others now. Please, Margot. I need to know if there are others." She turned to look at him fully, saw something wild in his eyes. Something almost afraid. "James, what's going on? What aren't you telling me?" He ran both hands through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as his tell when he was stressed. "I don't know, that's the truth. But there are things about my family, about this house, that have never made sense. Stories my brother told me before he died, things he'd found in my father's papers. He said the Harrows had secrets, dark ones, ones that went back generations. I thought he was just drunk, paranoid. But now, seeing this, what kind of secrets?" Margot's mouth was dry. "People who disappeared." James's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Daniel found records, old journals, letters, people who worked for the Harrows, people who lived in Killian, they'd just vanish. And the Harrows were always somehow connected, but nothing was ever proven. It went back to the beginning, to Jonathan Harrow. He said our family was built on blood, and someone had to answer for it." Margot's skin had gone cold. "What happened to those papers? The ones Daniel found?" "Gone." James met her eyes. "After he died, my father cleared out his room, burned everything, said it was all lies and paranoia, that Daniel had gone crazy at the end. But what if he hadn't? What if he found something real? You think these hidden figures might be, what? Evidence." Margot looked back at the young woman in Catherine's portrait, at her terrified eyes, her reaching hand. "James, even if there are more, what would it prove? These paintings are 200 years old. Everyone involved is long dead." "I know." He sank into the chair by the work table, looking suddenly exhausted. "I know it doesn't change anything, but I need to understand what my family did, what I'm the inheritor of. Please, Margot, help me find the truth. She should have said no, should have stuck to her contract, focused on the restoration work, stayed professional and distant. But looking at James, at the plea in his eyes, at the way his hands trembled slightly, she found herself nodding. Okay, she said quietly. I'll check the other portraits. But James, if we find something, if there's really evidence of crimes, we might have to go public with it. Historical record, documentation. It could destroy what's left of your family's reputation. Good, he said fiercely. Let it burn. Let it all burn. I'd rather be the Harrow who revealed the truth than the one who kept the lies going. They started that night, working by lamplight, going through the portraits one by one with UV light and magnification. Most showed nothing unusual, just centuries of normal aging and damage. But then they found the second one, a portrait of Thomas Harrow from 1789, shown standing in his study with books and papers. Under UV light, a figure appeared in the background, darkened almost to invisibility, but definitely there. Another young person, this one male, hands bound, eyes wide with the same terror Catherine's hidden figure had shown. Then a third, in a portrait of Margaret Harrow from 1823, and a fourth in William Harrow's portrait from 1856, each one carefully darkened, deliberately hidden, erased from family history. By 3 a.m, they'd found 7 hidden figures, 7 terrified faces, 7 people someone had wanted forgotten. James stood in the center of the studio, surrounded by portraits, and Margot watched something break in him. He sank to the floor, head in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She knelt beside him, pulled him against her, let him cry into her shoulder. His arms came around her, holding on like she was the only solid thing in a world that had just tilted sideways. What did they do? He whispered against her neck. What did my family do to these people? Margot didn't have an answer. She just held him, this broken man in this broken house, and wondered what other secrets were waiting to be uncovered. And in the shadows, the portraits watched with their visible eyes and their hidden ones, keeping their silence, holding their secrets, waiting. They fell asleep on the studio floor, wrapped around each other like survivors of a shipwreck, surrounded by portraits and their terrible secrets. When Margot woke, early morning light was streaming through the windows, and James was watching her with an expression so tender it made her chest ache. "Hi," he whispered, brushing hair from her face. "Hi," she whispered back. Neither of them moved for a long moment, caught in that fragile space between sleep and waking where everything feels possible and nothing has consequences yet. Then James leaned forward and kissed her, soft and careful, like she was something precious that might break. Margot knew she should pull away, should maintain boundaries, should remember every lesson Marcus had taught her about broken men and the women foolish enough to love them. But James's mouth was warm and gentle, and his hands cradled her face like she mattered, and it had been so long since anyone had touched her with anything resembling care. She kissed him back. It started slow, exploratory, 2 damaged people learning the shape of each other's mouths. But then something shifted, deepened, and Margot found herself pulling him closer, her fingers threading through his hair, her body pressing against his. James made a sound low in his throat, his hands moving to her waist, pulling her into his lap. They broke apart, breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. "We should stop," Margot said, even as her hands tightened in his shirt. "We should," James agreed, his lips finding her neck, sending shivers down her spine. "This is a terrible idea. The worst." But neither of them stopped. They made their way to his bedroom somehow, stumbling through hallways, stopping every few steps to kiss again, to press against walls, to learn the geography of each other's bodies through increasingly desperate touches. His room was in the east wing, smaller than she'd expected, almost Spartan, as if he'd never fully moved back into the house. They fell onto his bed, a tangle of limbs and want, and Margot let herself get lost in sensation, in the weight of his body, in the way he touched her like she was something he'd been searching for his whole life. Afterwards, lying in sheets that smelled like him, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. Margot felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. It was an illusion, she knew. Safety was always an illusion with damaged men in damaged houses full of dark secrets. But for just a moment, she let herself believe it. "Tell me this wasn't a mistake," James said quietly, his voice rough. Margot tilted her head to look at him. His eyes were worried, vulnerable, stripped of all the careful control he usually maintained. "I don't know what this was," she said honestly, "but it didn't feel like a mistake." He pulled her closer, buried his face in her hair. "I'm not good at this, Margot. At letting people in. At trusting. My family. This house. It taught me that love is just another way to destroy people. Then we'll figure it out together." She pressed a kiss to his collarbone. Two broken people trying not to break each other. "That's something, right? That's everything," he whispered. They spent the day in bed, talking and touching, learning each other's scars, both visible and not. James told her about his mother's death, how she'd grown increasingly paranoid in her final years, talking about voices in the walls, faces in the portraits, sins that needed to be answered for. His father had called it mental illness, had her heavily medicated, but she'd still found a way to die. Pills and bourbon in the bathtub on a Tuesday afternoon. Margot told him about Marcus, about the slow descent from charming to controlling to cruel, about the relief she'd felt when he died mixed with guilt for feeling relieved, about the debts he'd left her with, and the way she still heard his voice sometimes, telling her she was worthless, telling her she'd never be enough. "You're enough," James said fiercely, tilting her face up to meet his eyes. "You're more than enough. He was wrong about you, Margot. He was wrong about everything." She wanted to believe him, wanted to let his certainty heal something in her that Marcus had broken. But she'd learned that belief was dangerous, that hope could cut deeper than any blade. Evening came, and with it, reality. They had work to do, secrets to uncover, hidden figures to reveal. Margot returned to the studio while James made dinner, both of them moving carefully around the shift that had occurred between them, trying to figure out how to be whatever they were becoming. She started the detailed cleaning on the first hidden figure, the young woman in Catherine's portrait. The work was delicate, removing the layers of dark overpaint without damaging the original image beneath. Hours passed in focused silence, her world narrowing to the tiny section of canvas under her brush, the careful application of solvent, the slow revelation of hidden truth. By midnight, the figure was fully visible. The young woman's face was beautiful and terrified, her dark eyes wide, with what Margot now recognized as not just fear, but accusation. Her mouth was open, and now that the overpaint was removed, Margot could see details the artist had included. A torn dress, marks on her throat that might have been bruises or worse, and in the corner, barely visible, painted so small you'd miss it if you weren't looking closely, a date and initials. 1867, the year Catherine Harrow had died, and initials, M.T. Margot sat back, her hands trembling. This wasn't just a portrait with a hidden figure. This was documentation, evidence. The artist had deliberately included this woman, had marked when and who, had created a record someone else had later tried to destroy. "James," she called, her voice shaking. "James, you need to see this." He came running, still in pajama pants, hair wild from sleep she'd interrupted. He'd been dozing in the chair by her work table, keeping her company through the long hours of restoration. "Look," she said, pointing to the initials. MT 1867. The artist signed their documentation. This wasn't an accident or artistic choice, James. This was deliberate record-keeping. James leaned in, his face pale in the studio lights. "Who was MT?" "I don't know, but we can find out." Margot was already reaching for her laptop, pulling up historical records, artist databases. If they were painting for the Harrows in 1867, there should be records, commission receipts, something. They worked through the night, cross-referencing dates and initials, digging through online archives and historical databases. As dawn broke over Harrow House, painting the studio in shades of rose and gold, they found it. Matthew Turner, a portrait painter who'd worked throughout Georgia in the 1860s and 70s. He'd been commissioned by various wealthy families, including the Harrows, and according to a brief obituary from 1889, he'd spent his final years trying to atone for sins committed in his youth, though the obituary didn't specify what those sins were. He knew, James said softly, staring at the computer screen. He knew what my family was doing, and he documented it the only way he could, in the portraits themselves. But someone covered them up, Margot added. Someone saw what he'd done and tried to erase it. My family. James's voice was hollow. Generation after generation, maintaining the cover-up, hiding the evidence. Margot reached for his hand, laced her fingers through his. What do you want to do? He was quiet for a long time, staring at Catherine's portrait, at the young woman's terrified face, at the evidence of crimes committed more than a century ago. I want to restore them all, he said finally. Every hidden figure, every erased face. I want to bring them back into the light, give them the recognition they deserve. And then I want to donate the entire collection to a museum with full documentation of what the Harrows did. Let the world see what my family really was. That's going to take months, Margot said carefully. Maybe longer. Each restoration is painstaking work. Then stay. He turned to her, his eyes intense. Stay here, Margot. Help me do this. Help me make this right. She should have said no. Should have remembered that she'd come here for 6 months, that she had a life to return to in Philadelphia, debts to pay, a future to build that didn't involve getting tangled up with another broken man in another doomed situation. But looking at James, at the hope and need in his face, at the way he held her hand like she was his anchor in a storm, she found herself nodding. Okay, she whispered. I'll stay. He pulled her into his arms, held her so tight she could barely breathe, and Margot let herself believe that this time might be different, that this man might not break her, that this house might give up its secrets without demanding too high a price. She was wrong on all counts. The next weeks blurred together in a haze of work and stolen moments. Margot would spend her days in the studio, carefully revealing hidden figures, documenting everything with photographs and detailed notes. Each portrait yielded its secret. Each hidden face told its silent story of terror and accusation. MT, 1867. MT, 1865. MT, 1869. Matthew Turner had documented them all, had marked each one with date and initials, had tried to create a record that couldn't be completely erased. And the Harrows had tried anyway. Nights, Margot and James would fall into his bed, or hers, finding comfort in each other's bodies, trying to forget the weight of history pressing down on them. They'd talk for hours in the darkness, sharing secrets, building something that felt fragile and precious and terrifying. I love you, James said one night, his voice rough with emotion. Margot's breath caught. 3 words that should have made her run, should have triggered every alarm Marcus had installed in her psyche. But instead, she found herself saying, I love you too. And she did. Against all reason, against all her better judgment, she'd fallen in love with James Harrow and his damaged soul, and his determination to make amends for sins that weren't even his. It was Mrs. Chen who first suggested something was wrong. She came to the studio one afternoon, bringing tea and cookies, and stood for a long time looking at the restored portraits lined up against the wall. 7 hidden figures, now revealed, staring out with their terrified eyes. You shouldn't have done this, she said quietly. Margot looked up from her work. Done what? Brought them back. Mrs. Chen's face was grave. Some things are buried for a reason, child. Some secrets should stay hidden. These aren't secrets, Margot said, feeling defensive. These are people. They deserve to be remembered, to be seen. And what do you think will happen when they are? Mrs. Chen moved closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You think there will be justice? Closure? The people who did this are long dead, girl. All you're doing is waking ghosts. James needs to know the truth, Margot said stubbornly. Does he? Mrs. Chen's eyes were sad. Or does he need someone to love? Are him despite the truth? You think you're helping him, but all you're doing is giving him more weight to carry. And when it gets too heavy, when he can't bear it anymore, what do you think will happen? I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. Mrs. Chen touched Margot's shoulder gently. I've worked for the Harrows for 30 years. I watched James's mother go mad. Watched his brother drink himself to death trying to forget what he'd learned. Watched his father retreat into bitterness and bourbon. This house, these secrets, they destroy everyone who gets too close. And now you're in deep. And so is James, and I'm afraid of how this ends. We're not them, Margot said, but her voice wavered. Everyone thinks they're different. Mrs. Chen squeezed her shoulder once, then turned to leave. At the door, she paused. There's one more thing you should know. Matthew Turner, the artist who painted these hidden figures, he died in this house. Fell down the main staircase and broke his neck, just like James's brother. 30 years apart, same stairs, same way to die. You think about that when you're deciding whether to keep digging up the past. She left, and Margot sat alone in the studio, surrounded by accusing eyes, feeling cold despite the warm afternoon. That night, she tried to tell James what Mrs. Chen had said, but he brushed it off. She's superstitious, he said, pulling Margot into his arms. Small town thinking. There's no curse, Margot. Just a family of terrible people doing terrible things and getting away with it for too long. We're ending that. We're making it right. But lying in his bed that night, listening to him breathe beside her, Margot couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important, that the real secret of Harrow House was still waiting to be discovered, and that when they found it, it would destroy everything. The 8th portrait was different. Margot noticed it immediately when she began the restoration. This one was newer than the others, painted in 1985, just 4 years before Matthew Turner's obituary claimed he died. But Turner would have been in his 90s by then, far too old to still be painting. Yet the initials were there, clear as day, MT. The portrait showed James's father, Thomas Harrow III, in his study, looking distinguished and severe in expensive clothes. And behind him, darkened almost to invisibility, was another figure. Margot worked carefully, removing the overpaint layer by layer, her hands steady despite the growing sense of unease in her stomach. Something about this portrait felt different, wrong in a way she couldn't articulate. As the hidden figure emerged, Margot's hands began to shake. It was a young man, maybe 25, with James's dark hair and sharp cheekbones. The family resemblance was unmistakable, and unlike the other hidden figures who'd been painted with expressions of terror and accusation, this young man was smiling. No, not smiling. Grinning. There was something cruel in that grin, something knowing and dark that made Margot's skin crawl. And in the corner, painted in the same tiny script as the others, initials and a date. DH, 1985. Not MT Daniel Harrow. Margot sat back, her heart hammering. Daniel Harrow, James's brother, who'd died in 1995, who'd supposedly discovered the family's dark secrets and been consumed by them. Daniel Harrow had painted this portrait, had hidden himself in his father's image, had signed it with his own initials. But why? And why was he grinning like that? Like he knew something terrible, something that delighted him. Margot! She jumped, spinning to find James in the doorway. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. I finished another one, she said, her voice strange to her own ears. But James, this one's different. He moved into the studio, and she watched his face as he saw the portrait, saw the hidden figure, saw his brother's grinning face staring out from their father's portrait. All the color drained from James's face. No, he whispered. No, that's not. Daniel didn't. Look at the initials, Margot said quietly, pointing. DH, 1985. Your brother painted this, James. He continued what Matthew Turner started. James sank into the chair by the work table, his face in his hands. I need to show you something, he said finally. Something I found in my father's study after he died. Come with me. Margot followed him through the house, down corridors she'd never explored, to a part of the east wing that felt colder than the rest. Thomas Harrow's study was all dark wood and leather and the smell of old cigars. James went to a locked cabinet, pulled out a key from his pocket, opened it with hands that shook. Inside were ledgers, dozens of them, stretching back centuries. He pulled out the most recent ones, laid them on the desk. "I thought these were business records," he said, his voice hollow. "Family finances, estate management. But look at the entries." Margot leaned over the ledgers, scanning the neat handwriting. At first, it did look like business records, payments and receipts and expenses. But then she started noticing the patterns. Names, always just first names or initials. Dates, and amounts, always the same, $10,000. "What is this?" she whispered. "Keep reading," James said, his voice dead. She flipped back through the ledgers, through decades of entries, and slowly, horribly, the pattern became clear. Every year, sometimes twice a year, an entry, a name or initials, a date, $10,000, and in the margins, in different handwriting, sometimes a note, completed, or disposed of, or simply done. She found the entries from 1867, the year Catherine Harrow had died. There, in careful script, MT, May 12th, 10,000. Completed. MT. The same initials Matthew Turner had used to sign his hidden figures. "These aren't victims," Margot said slowly, the horror dawning. "These are payments. The Harrows weren't killing people themselves. They were paying for it to be done." "Contract killings," James whispered. "Going back to the very beginning. Anyone who threatened the family, anyone who knew too much, anyone who got in the way." He looked up at her, his eyes hollow. "And Matthew Turner wasn't documenting victims, Margot. He was signing his work." The room tilted. "No," Margot said. But even as she said it, she knew it was true. The hidden figures, they weren't evidence of crimes. They were trophies. Turner was the killer, and he signed each portrait with the initials of his victims and the dates he killed them. "And someone in my family paid him to do it," James said. "Then later, when Turner got old or guilty, they had someone paint over the evidence, tried to erase it all." Margot flipped forward in the ledgers, her hands shaking, knowing what she was going to find. 1989. MT. August 3rd, 10,000. Completed. The date Matthew Turner had died, fallen down the stairs and broken his neck. And then 1995. DH October 15th, 10,000. No note of completion. Just the entry, and then nothing. The date Daniel Harrow had died. "James, your brother, he didn't discover the truth. He was part of it. He continued the tradition, took over when Turner died. He was the next killer. And my father found out," James said, his voice breaking. "Daniel painted himself into that portrait, signed it with his own initials, left evidence of what he was. So my father had him killed too. Staged it as an accident, just like all the others." They stood in silence, the weight of 300 years of murder pressing down on them. "The paintings," Margot said finally. "James, we can't donate them now. They're not evidence of victimization. They're a killer's gallery. If we make this public, then everyone will know what my family really was," James finished. He moved to the window, looking out at the grounds. "All those people in Killian who suffered when the Harrows fell from grace, they'll know their families were touched by this too. Some of those names in the ledgers, Margot, I recognize them. Their descendants are still around. This will destroy more than just my family's name." "What are you saying?" He turned to face her, and what she saw in his eyes made her blood run cold. "I'm saying maybe some secrets should stay buried." "No," Margot said, backing toward the door. "James, no, we can't. We have to tell someone. The police, historians, someone needs to know." "Why?" His voice was calm, too calm. "Everyone involved is dead, Margot. There's no justice to be had. No one to punish. All we'd be doing is causing more pain." "You don't mean that." But even as she said it, she saw the change in him, saw something shift behind his eyes. She ran. Through the house, her footsteps echoing off marble and wood. Portraits watching her flight with their visible and hidden eyes. Behind her, she heard James calling her name, his footsteps following, measured and unhurried. He wasn't chasing her. He was herding her. She realized it too late, realized she'd been running toward the front of the house, toward the grand staircase, The same staircase where Matthew Turner had died, where Daniel Harrow had died. Margot skidded to a stop at the top of the stairs, breathing hard, and turned to find James standing in the hallway behind her, blocking her retreat. "Don't do this," she pleaded. "James, please, I love you." "I love you too," he said, and the terrible thing was, she believed him. He pulled out a checkbook, pulled out a pen, and there, standing in the hallway with portraits watching from every wall, he wrote a check, $10,000. He tore it off, held it out to her. "The Harrows don't kill people," he said quietly. "We pay for it to be done. We keep our hands clean. That's the tradition. I don't understand. Don't you?" He smiled, and it was Daniel's smile from the portrait, that same cruel knowledge. "You came here with nothing, Margot, drowning in debt, running from your past, desperate enough to take any job. I could have hired any restorer in the country, but I chose you. Do you know why?" Her mouth had gone dry. "Because you were perfect," James continued. "Talented enough to do the work, desperate enough not to ask too many questions, damaged enough to fall in love with another broken soul. I needed someone to restore the portraits, to bring the hidden figures to light, to uncover the truth. But I also needed someone who would understand, in the end, why that truth needed to stay hidden. You planned this." Margot's voice was barely a whisper. "All of it. The romance, the vulnerability, making me care about you." "Not all of it," James said, and there was genuine pain in his eyes. "I didn't plan to fall in love with you. That was real, Margot. That is real. Which is why I'm giving you a choice." He held up the check. "Take this, take it, and walk away. Leave Killian, start over with enough money to pay off your debts and build a real life. And in exchange, you forget what you learned here. Let the dead stay buried. And if I don't," his face hardened, "then you become part of the record. Another entry in the ledger, another accident in a house full of them. The police will believe it. Mrs. Chen will testify that you'd been working too hard, that the restoration had become an obsession. A tragic accident. Nothing more." Margot stared at the check, at the $10,000 that represented 300 years of blood money. She thought about Marcus, about the debts waiting for her in Philadelphia, about survival. She thought about the young woman in Catherine's portrait, about all the hidden faces, not knowing she was revealing a killer's gallery. "I'll take it," she said quietly. Something flickered in James's eyes, triumph mixed with disappointment. He'd wanted her to be different, she realized, had wanted her to choose death over compromise. He handed her the check and their fingers touched for just a moment. His skin was cold. "There's a car waiting," he said. "Mrs. Chen packed your things. I'd suggest somewhere far from here, somewhere you can forget." "Will you?" Margot asked. "Forget me?" "No." His voice was barely a whisper. "I'll remember you for the rest of my life." She walked past him, away from the stairs, away from becoming just another entry in the Harrow ledger. Mrs. Chen was waiting by the front door, her face unreadable. "I tried to warn you," she said softly, pressing a jade pendant into Margot's hand. 6 months later, Margot had a new life in Portland, a small apartment overlooking the harbor, a job restoring paintings for a local gallery. She'd paid off Marcus's debts with James's blood money. She almost convinced herself she was happy. Then one morning, she saw the headline, "Last heir to historic Harrow estate dies in tragic accident." Her hands started shaking. James Harrow had been found dead at the bottom of the grand staircase. Police ruled it accidental. The article noted he'd recently completed restoration of the family portraits, revealing previously unknown figures that provided insights into the lives of working-class people in the antebellum South. Margot found the auction listing online. There, at the end of the collection, was a portrait she'd never seen. A new portrait. James had commissioned one final painting before he died. It showed him in the library, looking tired but peaceful. And behind him, barely visible but definitely there, a figure in shadow. Margot zoomed in, her heart hammering. A woman with dark hair and sad eyes. A woman who looked exactly like her. In the corner, MB, the date she'd left Harrow House. Understanding crashed over her. James hadn't painted himself as a killer like Daniel had. He'd painted himself as the victim, and her as his killer, not because she'd pushed him, but because she'd taken his money and walked away, had left him alone with the weight of his family's sins, had abandoned him to the only choice he had left. The portraits would hang in museums now. Scholars would study them. The victims would be remembered. And there, in that final portrait, Margot would be preserved too, not as a restorer who'd brought truth to light, but as the woman who'd taken blood money and left a man to die alone. James's final victim and final judgment. She'd thought she was escaping the Harrow legacy, but James had made sure she'd carry it forever, had immortalized her complicity in oil and canvas. Margot touched the jade pendant at her neck. Protection, Mrs. Chen had said. Not from James, not from the Harrows, from herself, from the woman she'd become the moment she took that check. She stared at her reflection in the window, a woman with sad eyes and blood on her hands, another hidden figure in the Harrow collection, preserved forever in the shadows where she belonged. The portraits would tour museums worldwide, James's final gift to history. And everywhere they went, Margot would go too, her face hidden in shadow, but her guilt preserved forever. She would live a long life, would grow old in her perfect apartment, would never speak of what happened. But every time she saw those portraits mentioned, she would remember, would see James's face in the darkness, would feel the weight of that check in her hand, would know that some things, once broken, can never truly be repaired. Only documented, only remembered, only carried forever, like a jade pendant against the skin, like a portrait hanging in shadow, like blood money in a bank account, like guilt that would last forever. The Harrow legacy had claimed one more victim after all, just not in the way anyone expected.